In a mansion high on the cliffs above the restless sea, where the air carried salt and silence more heavily than joy, there lived the Roth family. The mansion itself was a monument to grief. Its marble floors were polished daily, gleaming like mirrors, but no one dared to look into them too long, for the reflection would reveal not life, but emptiness. The windows stretched wide and tall, yet the curtains were drawn more often than not, dimming the light of mornings and muffling the color of sunsets. The house looked alive to outsiders, its walls impressive, its gardens perfect, but to those who breathed within it, it felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Damien Roth, the master of the house, was a man of immense wealth, sharp mind, and impenetrable pride. He had made his fortune by predicting markets, by mastering numbers that never lied, and by silencing anything uncertain. His empire was built on control, and so was his home. But no empire can silence grief. Years ago, when his wife Evelyn died suddenly, he locked his heart in the same vault where he stored his fortune. He did not speak of her name. He did not allow her music to be played. He believed that by silencing memory, he could protect his children and perhaps himself. Yet what he created was not protection. It was a prison of quietness. The Roth children were not one, not two, but three. Triplets, born together in one night of both miracle and tragedy. Evelyn had brought them into the world with her last breath, leaving Damien with 3 fragile lives and a silence he never learned how to fill. The children grew, but they grew differently than others. Leo, with partial hearing loss, pressed his ear against wooden surfaces as though the earth itself whispered to him through vibrations. Mila, sensitive to every sound, flinched even at the closing of a door, as if noise itself were an enemy she could never escape. Bennie, the quietest of the 3, rarely spoke at all. His voice seemed locked away, as though he had inherited his father's silence instead of his mother's music. To outsiders, the children appeared delicate, tragic heirs of an empire of sorrow. Doctors came and went, therapists visited, and specialists filled folders with notes and predictions. They charted progress on graphs, reported delays, and offered explanations that sounded more like verdicts. But none of them brought laughter into the house. None of them brought color to the children's faces. The Roth mansion remained the same, gleaming, ordered, and suffocating. Into this world arrived Maya Santos, a young woman with no fortune, no title, and no power except the one gift that mattered, the ability to see children not as broken puzzles, but as whole souls waiting for someone to listen. She had grown up in a world far different from marble halls. Her childhood home had been small, noisy, and alive, filled with clattering pots, arguments shouted across rooms, and music that never truly stopped. To her, sound was not something to fear, but something that carried life. She brought that memory with her into the mansion, even though the house tried to strip it from her the moment she arrived. From a first day, Maya was reminded of her place. The head housekeeper, stern and precise, told her not to sing to the children. Veronica Roth, Damien's sister who oversaw much of the household, warned her not to get too attached. "They are delicate," she said coldly. "They need structure, not sentiment." Damien himself, distant and shadowed, barely looked at Maya when she was introduced. He signed documents for her employment the way one might approve an invoice, efficient, detached, and with no expectation of significance. She was there to serve, not to matter. The children, too, seemed hesitant. They watched her with cautious eyes, more curious than welcoming. They had seen nannies come and go, many arriving with smiles and leaving with tears. They did not trust easily, not because they were unkind, but because they had learned that trust was fragile and loss inevitable. Maya did not try to force their affection. She simply stayed. She folded their clothes carefully, prepared their meals with quiet care, and let her presence become a steady rhythm in a house built on silence. Yet even in those early days, she felt it, the mansion was not as impenetrable as it appeared. Sometimes late at night, she thought she heard echoes, whispers in the hallways, fragments of laughter pressed into the walls like memories refusing to die. And one morning, while serving tea to the family lawyer, Dr. Calder, she overheard a sentence that would change the way she saw everything. Calder was speaking to Damien about Evelyn's will. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Evelyn had spoken of a codicil, a hidden amendment. "If the house forgets to sing," she had written, "look where the children dance." Damien dismissed it as nonsense, the sentimental poetry of a woman too fond of riddles. But the words struck Maya like lightning. They lodged themselves deep in her chest, pulsing with meaning she did not yet understand. The days that followed were filled with humiliation. Veronica made remarks in front of guests, mocking Maya's background and her methods. Damien, though not cruel, was cold, reminding her often of the specialists who knew more than she ever could. Even the other staff treated her with suspicion, as though waiting for her inevitable failure. Maya absorbed it all in silence. What mattered was not her dignity in the eyes of the household, but the flicker she saw beginning in the eyes of the children. She noticed how Leo pressed his cheek to the wooden floor when the washing machine hummed, smiling faintly at vibrations no one else felt. She saw how Mila, though startled by sudden noises, tapped her fingers in secret patterns, as if she longed for sound, but only on her own terms. She watched Bennie, who rarely spoke, twirl in slow circles, his arms swaying as though he were singing with his body instead of his voice. Maya began to wonder, were these not limitations but clues? Clues to the language they already knew? It happened one afternoon in the kitchen when the weight of silence became too much for her to bear. The triplets sat at the table, quiet and withdrawn, their plates untouched. Maya stood at the counter, her heart heavy. She thought of her own childhood, of laughter spilling from every corner of a noisy house, and the contrast was unbearable. On impulse, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small speaker she carried everywhere. She placed it gently on the wooden cutting board at the center of the kitchen island and pressed play. At first, the sound was barely audible, just a soft hum, almost secret. The song was one her mother used to sing, slow and filled with warmth. Maya tapped the board with a spoon, keeping time with the rhythm. 3 taps, 5 taps, 8 taps. She did not expect anything. She only hoped the sound might soften the air for a moment. But something shifted. Mila, usually fearful, lowered her hands from her ears and tilted her head. Leo leaned forward, pressing his cheek against the wood, his eyes widening as he felt the vibration travel through it. Bennie blinked, then began to sway his arms, clumsy but deliberate, as though the beat had entered his bones. Maya's heart leapt. She exaggerated her movements, turning her taps into a playful sway. To her astonishment, the children responded. They climbed onto the kitchen island, first Leo, then Mila, then Bennie, transforming the forbidden surface into a stage. They moved awkwardly, their steps unsteady, but their laughter burst forth like water from a long dry well. They giggled, stomped, and clapped in rhythm with Maya, who spun with exaggerated joy to encourage them. The kitchen, once sterile, now pulsed with life. For the first time since Evelyn's death, the mansion remembered how to sing. For the first time, the triplets were not silent shadows but living children, alive in motion, alive in laughter. Maya's own cheeks ached from smiling, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. She knew this was no accident. This was the beginning of Evelyn's riddle. Look where the children dance. But the moment was not theirs alone. At the doorway stood Damien Roth, frozen. He had come for a file left on the counter, but what he saw shook him to his core. His 3 children, who had lived in silence for so long, were dancing and laughing on the very surface he forbade them to touch. His chest ached violently, as though grief and hope collided all at once. Behind him, Veronica gasped in horror, her voice sharp as she declared Maya irresponsible, reckless, unfit. The children froze, their joy shrinking under the weight of judgment. The room fell silent once more, but the memory of laughter lingered in the air, impossible to erase. That night, Maya returned to the kitchen alone. She could not forget the grooves she had felt under the wooden lip of the island, the faint seam that had shifted when she tapped the rhythm. With trembling hands, she traced it again. 3, 5, 8. A click echoed softly, almost hidden, and for the briefest moment she thought she heard a whisper. The island was not only a stage, it was a secret, and Evelyn's riddle was no longer poetry, it was a map. And so, the first act closed not with peace, but with a promise. The children had danced, the house had sung again, and the nanny who was supposed to remain invisible had uncovered the first crack in the fortress of silence. The impossible problem was no longer hidden. It was waiting alive in wooden rhythm, where only the children could lead the way. The days after the kitchen dance did not unfold as a victory. In most homes, the sound of children laughing would be celebrated, cherished, protected as something sacred. But in the Roth mansion, joy was not welcomed as a guest. It was treated as an intruder. Where a lesser storm might have subsided into warmth, a greater storm began to brew. And it was aimed not at the children, but at the woman who had dared to wake them from silence. Maya felt the weight of it almost immediately. At breakfast the next morning, Veronica Roth, Damien's sharp-tongued sister, spoke in front of the household staff, as though delivering a verdict. She called the dancing incident a humiliation to the family's name. She mocked Maya's street theatrics and declared that any servant who encouraged chaos in a house of order was unworthy of trust. Her words were not just criticism, they were designed to wound. Staff exchanged wary glances, uncertain whether to laugh in agreement or remain silent. Maya lowered her eyes, not in shame but in restraint, refusing to let Veronica see the fire building inside her. Damien said little. He sat at the head of the table, his face carved in stone. Yet silence can be sharper than words. His refusal to defend Maya was its own kind of judgment, one that pressed harder than Veronica's mockery. He was a man torn. One side of him had witnessed his children alive for the first time. The other side clung to the order and control that had protected him for years. To admit Maya had unlocked something true would mean admitting that Evelyn had been right, and that all his silence had been wrong. That admission was heavier than he could bear. The triplets, though too young to understand the full weight of adult pride, sensed the shift. Where once they had giggled freely at the sound of Maya's rhythms, now they grew cautious again, peeking around corners before approaching her, as if afraid that their laughter might summon punishment. Their eyes carried questions they cannot voice. Is joy allowed? Is play safe? Will we lose this too? Maya's heart broke each time she saw their hesitation, but she carried on. For them, she would endure any humiliation. In secret, she continued the rhythms. On rainy afternoons, when the sea fog wrapped itself around the mansion like a cloak, Maya spread a blanket across the kitchen floor. She set the cutting board down and tapped softly, 3, 5, 8. At first the triplets only watched wary. But slowly, they leaned into the game again. Mila clapped cautiously. Leo pressed his ear to the board, and Bennie twirled in tiny circles. The air filled once more with fragile giggles, the kind that blossom only when trust is stronger than fear. And each time, Maya's conviction deepened. The children were not unreachable. They were simply waiting for someone who believed. But joy leaves evidence. One morning, during a brunch designed to impress investors and visiting dignitaries, Veronica noticed the children absent-mindedly tapping a rhythm on the table. 3, 5, 8. To her it was not innocent. It was rebellion. Her face flushed with fury. In front of the guests, she denounced Maya as reckless, accusing her of undermining professional therapy and filling the children's heads with childish tricks. The guests chuckled politely, not because they cared, but because they feared offending the Roths. Maya felt her cheeks burn, her dignity stripped away in public. The children froze, their tiny fingers retreating to their laps, their eyes wide with shame they did not deserve. The humiliation was complete. Later that day, Damien summoned Maya to his study. His words were not shouted, they were measured, heavy, final. He told her she was overstepping. He reminded her of the resources he had poured into therapy, the experts with degrees and decades of knowledge. How could she, a mere nanny, presume to know better? Maya listened, her hands folded tightly, her heart pounding. Then, with a calmness that surprised even her, she replied, "I see your children as more than a diagnosis." For the first time, Damien's eyes flickered, his composure cracking. But he said nothing more. He dismissed her with a wave, leaving her words to echo in the silence. The following days became trials of endurance. Therapists whispered that Maya was interfering with progress. Staff treated her with suspicion, half convinced she would be dismissed. Veronica cornered her in hallways, whispering that girls like you always climb too high, and when you fall harder. The words stung, but Maya endured. She carried each insult silently, because she had something stronger than their scorn, the unwavering gaze of 3 children who clung to her as though she were their anchor. Her moments with the triplets became defiant acts of love. Folding laundry transformed into puppet shows, with socks turned into talking characters that made the children giggle uncontrollably. Sweeping floors became races. The broom transformed into a baton of joy as the children stumbled after her, their laughter echoing off marble walls that had long forgotten such sound. Even dishwashing became wonder, as Maya filled the sink with bubbles and blew them into the air, watching the triplets chase and pop them with squeals of delight. Each act was ordinary, yet each was revolutionary. In a house ruled by silence, she had found ways to plant laughter like seeds breaking through stone. But humiliation has long shadows. One afternoon, Dr. Harold Stein, the respected neurologist who had followed the children since birth, arrived for an evaluation. Damien's pride was on the line. He urged the children to show what they had learned, to demonstrate the signs, the laughter, the rhythms. But under the weight of Stein's clinical gaze, the children froze. Leo's fingers faltered. Mila hid her hands beneath the table. Bennie turned away, burying his face against Maya's side. Silence fell heavier than ever. Stein scribbled notes on his pad, unimpressed. He warned Damien not to mistake mimicry for progress, not to confuse moments of bonding with true development. He cautioned against false hope, declaring it more damaging than silence itself. Damien's face hardened. For weeks he had allowed himself to believe. He had dared to imagine that Evelyn's riddle might hold truth, that Maya's rhythms might be more than illusions. Now, in front of a man whose authority he trusted, all of it crumbled. His humiliation twisted into anger, and that anger sought a target. He turned on Maya. His words were sharp, accusing her of planting illusions, of tricking the children, of making him believe in miracles only to humiliate him before science. The venom in his tone was as much self-loathing as it was accusation, but Maya bore it silently, her chest burning, her eyes steady. She told him quietly that hope was not an illusion, it was the only nourishment his children had been denied. Her words struck him, but his pride refused to yield. The confrontation left the house colder than ever. Damien retreated into his office, drowning himself in contracts he could not read. Maya moved through the halls with measured silence, her laughter subdued, her warmth dimmed. The children felt it most keenly. Their giggles became whispers, their eyes clouded with confusion. They clung to her more tightly, as if afraid the fragile bridge they had built might collapse under the weight of adult pride. But children do not abandon what saves them. One evening after dinner, Leo spotted Maya's bag half open. Inside, the small speaker glimmered like hidden treasure. With determined little hands, he pulled it free. Bennie dragged the wooden cutting board across the floor, its scrape echoing in the kitchen like a declaration. Mila clapped insistently, urging Maya to join. Their faces glowed with determination. Joy must not die. For a moment, Maya hesitated. Her heart still stung from Damien's words, her pride still raw from Veronica's scorn. But when the triplets began stomping their small feet to the rhythm 3, 5, 8, she could not resist. She bent low, matched their rhythm, and swayed. The kitchen filled once more with laughter, louder than before, as if defying the silence that sought to cage them. Their joy was not reckless. It was survival. Upstairs, Damien heard it. At first, he told himself to ignore it. He told himself it was disorder, a violation of rules. But the sound tugged at him like a rope around his chest. Against his will, he descended the stairs, his footsteps heavy, his breath uneven. At the doorway, he froze. What he saw shattered the armor he had worn for years. His 3 children, stomping in unison, their faces radiant with joy, and Maya spinning among them like light itself. And then the unthinkable happened. The children noticed him. They stopped their dance, raised their small hands, and shaped clumsy signs. Their message was imperfect but clear: "Dance, Papa." For a heartbeat, Damien could not move. His heart pounded. His knees threatened to give way. He was a man of contracts and markets, not rhythm. Yet his children's eyes held him, begging him to step into their world. And for the first time, pride yielded. With trembling hands, Damien stepped forward. His movements were awkward, his sway uncertain, but when he joined them, the children shrieked with laughter so pure it broke through every wall. He crouched low, mimicking their stomps, spinning clumsily with them, and for the first time in years, he was not the billionaire, not the widower, not the master of silence. He was simply their father. The fragile peace in the Roth mansion did not last. Joy had slipped through the cracks like sunlight into a forgotten cellar, but sunlight also reveals dust. And once revealed, dust demands to be swept away or covered once again. The laughter of the triplets had returned, their small stomps and claps filling the kitchen with rhythms no one thought possible. Damien had stepped into their circle, his pride yielding just enough to taste fatherhood. Yet where joy grows, resistance always rises. And in this house, resistance carried the sharp voice of Veronica Roth. To Veronica, the nanny was not a blessing, but a threat. She believed order was the only salvation for fragile children. She believed reputation was more important than play. Each time she saw the triplets laughing with Maya, each time she witnessed Damien's armor cracking, she saw her influence slipping away. And influence was all Veronica had left. Her words became sharper, her glances colder. She spoke to the staff of boundaries crossed. She whispered to doctors of false hope planted. She reminded Damien that investors respected discipline, not chaos. In her eyes, Maya was not guiding the children, she was undoing the very foundation of the Roth legacy. Maya endured as she always did. She had come to expect humiliation, to breathe through it, to carry it silently for the sake of the children. But what she carried now was heavier, for she had uncovered something no one else knew: Evelyn Roth's hidden message. That afternoon in the kitchen, when her fingers traced the grooves carved into the wooden island 3, 5, 8, the drawer had shifted. And within that drawer a secret waited. A wooden box, Evelyn's initials engraved upon it, its contents trembling with the weight of truth. Maya had not opened it fully at first. She had feared discovery, feared dismissal, feared the storm that truth always summons. Yet she knew she could not keep it hidden forever. When she finally opened the box in the solitude of her small quarters, her hands shook. Inside lay a letter, its ink faded but its message alive, and a small flash drive wrapped in velvet. The letter carried Evelyn's unmistakable hand, a voice preserved for a moment such as this. Maya read slowly, her chest tightening with every line. If you are holding this, it means the house has remembered how to sing. The children must never be raised by silence alone. They will need not only structure, but joy, music, and someone who sees them beyond their limitations. If Damien cannot bear that weight, guardianship will pass to the one who restores their laughter. Maya's eyes blurred with tears. It was not just sentiment. It was law. Evelyn had foreseen everything: Damien's grief, Veronica's obsession with control, the possibility that silence would strangle the children's lives. And so she had planted a safeguard, a riddle hidden in wood and rhythm, a truth no one would find unless the children danced again. Maya understood at once. Evelyn's words were not poetry. They were prophecy. But prophecy, once revealed, always brings conflict. The flash drive confirmed what the letter promised. Legal documents, signed and sealed, outlined Evelyn's amendment to the will. If the children's joy was not nurtured, if their growth was stunted by silence, custody could shift. The courts could intervene. Guardianship would not belong solely to Damien or to Veronica. It could pass to another. And though Evelyn did not name Maya by name, the description was clear: the one who restores their laughter. Maya's heart raced. She had not come to the mansion for power. She had not sought authority. She had only wanted to care for the children, to protect them from a house that had forgotten how to breathe. Yet now she held in her hands the very weapon that could unravel the Roth empire or save it. Inevitably, the secret surfaced. Damien discovered the box when he saw Maya returning from the kitchen late one night, her hands trembling with something she tried to hide. At first he accused her of stealing, his pride snapping like a whip. But when the letter spilled into the lamplight, his world cracked. He read Evelyn's words with a face that paled, his lips pressed into a line as though each sentence struck him like a blade. He demanded answers from Maya, why she had opened it, why she had kept it. She told him the truth, that she had only wanted to understand, that she had only wanted to protect what Evelyn had left behind. Her words pierced him, for deep inside he knew Evelyn had not trusted him fully. She had left protection not to his empire, but to joy. The revelation spread quickly. Veronica, ever alert to weakness, seized the moment. She accused Maya of manipulation, of twisting Evelyn's words to steal influence. She insisted the letter was sentimental nonsense, the flash drive forged or exaggerated. She declared that a nanny could never be entrusted with guardianship, that Evelyn had been delirious in her final days. But the family lawyer, Dr. Calder, examined the documents with care. They were authentic. The codicil was binding. Evelyn's wishes could not be dismissed. The house erupted in turmoil. Damien raged in silence, torn between humiliation and awe. Veronica sharpened her attacks, determined to see Maya expelled before the law could shift against them. The staff whispered endlessly, some siding with Veronica, others secretly admiring Maya's courage. And through it all, the triplets clung to Maya's hands, sensing the storm, though not its details. Their trust in her deepened, their small bodies pressing against her legs as if she were the only anchor in the house. The conflict soon spilled beyond marble walls. A custody review was scheduled. Doctors, lawyers, and extended family gathered in the great hall, where chandeliers gleamed like cold stars above the tension. Veronica painted Maya as reckless, dangerous, a servant overstepping her station. She recited incidents of dancing on tables, bubbles in kitchens, puppets made of socks. She twisted joy into evidence of chaos. Maya, standing before them, did not flinch. She did not argue loudly. She spoke softly, her voice steady, describing the children as she saw them not as fragile patients, not as heirs to be protected, but as children who had learned to live again. But it was not her words that turned the tide. It was the children themselves. In that room filled with judgment, the triplets stepped forward. They looked to Maya, who bent low and tapped the rhythm upon the polished floor. 3, 5, 8. Without hesitation, Mila clapped, Leo pressed his ear against the wood, and Bennie twirled. Their laughter burst forth, echoing in the solemn chamber. And then Bennie whispered a word. His lips trembled, his voice cracked, but the sound was clear enough to shatter the silence. Papa. Gasps filled the hall. Doctors who had dismissed progress froze in disbelief. Lawyers leaned forward, their pens pausing midair. Veronica's face drained of color. And Damien, his heart, his grief, his pride collapsed in on itself. His son had spoken. His son had called him, not in silence, not in imagination, but in truth. Maya felt her breath catch. She saw Damien's shoulders shake, saw his eyes burn with tears he had refused for years. She saw the walls of silence crumble in real time. Evelyn's prophecy had come alive. The impossible had become undeniable. The nanny mocked as reckless had achieved what no empire of wealth or science could. She had restored laughter. She had made the mansion sing again. But victory carried weight. The tribunal ended not with dismissal, but with acknowledgment. Evelyn's codicil stood. Maya could not be dismissed lightly. The courts recognized her as a figure of influence, a potential guardian, should Damien fail. Veronica seethed, her eyes sharp with promises of vengeance. Damien, though shaken, could not meet Maya's gaze. He was torn between gratitude and humiliation, between the truth of Evelyn's words and the pride that still chained him. That night, the mansion felt different. The staff whispered. The children slept peacefully, their tiny hands still twitching with rhythm, even in dreams. Maya sat alone, staring at the letter once more, wondering what weight Evelyn had left her. She was not family, not blood, not wealth. She was only the nanny. Yet she was the one Evelyn had trusted with the key. The secret of Evelyn's will, the undeniable laughter of the triplets, the fracture of Damien's pride, and the fury of Veronica's rage. The house no longer belonged to silence alone. The truth had been spoken, the prophecy unveiled, and the final test lay ahead. Would Damien embrace the gift his wife had left him, or would pride destroy it all? The Roth mansion had survived storms of grief, of silence, of humiliation. Yet the greatest storm had only just passed. Evelyn's prophecy revealed, her hidden letter unsealed, the triplets laughing and speaking before witnesses who had once declared them unreachable. The echoes of that day lingered in the marble halls long after the tribunal ended. But echoes are fragile. For them to grow into music, someone must carry the rhythm forward. And now the question remained, who would carry it? Damien Roth was not the same man who had buried himself in silence years ago, yet neither was he fully changed. The pride that had built his empire still whispered in his ear, telling him to dismiss Maya's influence as luck, to reclaim control, to ensure no one questioned his authority. But another voice now competed within him, a voice he had not heard since Evelyn's laughter filled their home. It was quieter, but stronger than pride. It whispered of love, of fatherhood, of life beyond silence. And each time his children looked at him, with eyes glowing from joy, that voice grew louder. Veronica did not retreat. She wove her bitterness into every corner of the house, pressing staff to remember who signed their paychecks, reminding Damien of reputations at stake. She claimed Maya was dangerous, her influence a threat to the family's stability. She even suggested new guardianship arrangements, lawyers who might reinterpret Evelyn's letter in her favor. But for the first time, Damien no longer listened to her, as he once did. He had seen too much. He had felt too much. The children, oblivious to the adult wars around them, clung to the new rhythm that defined their lives. Each morning began not with silence, but with play. Leo pressed his cheek against the dining table, waiting for vibrations. Mila tapped patterns on her cereal bowl, giggling when Bennie clapped in response. Their bond with Maya deepened, their trust in her was absolute. She became more than caregiver, more than servant. She was their compass, the one who led them into the light each time shadows threatened. Yet Maya herself carried a heavy weight. She had never wanted power. She had never sought control. She had come to the mansion to nurture, not to fight legal battles or defend herself against Veronica's venom. At night, in her small quarters, she sometimes stared at Evelyn's letter and wondered why fate had chosen her. Why had Evelyn trusted a stranger more than her own husband's silence? Why had this responsibility fallen on her shoulders? The answer was not clear, but the evidence surrounded her in the laughter of the children. They had chosen her again and again, and in their choice, she found her courage renewed. The turning point came one evening when the triplets tugged at Damien's hands with an insistence that could not be ignored. They led him to the garden, where Maya had set up ribbons of color across the lawn, anchored by sticks in the soft soil. It was not therapy. It was not structure. It was play. She called it the path of colors. The children followed the ribbons clumsily, stumbling, falling, rising again, their giggles carrying across the twilight air. Damien stood back at first, his chest tight with pride and fear. Then Leo turned, raised his small hands, and shaped a clumsy sign. "Come, Papa." The words struck Damien harder than any verdict, any judgment, any contract he had ever signed. His knees buckled. For a moment, pride told him to stay still, to let the nanny handle it, to keep his distance. But love rose stronger. He stepped forward, then ran. He knelt in the grass, gathering the triplets into his arms, tears pouring freely, unrestrained. His sobs shook the night, but the children did not flinch. They pressed their small bodies against him, their little hands tangling in his shirt, there. Voices whispering imperfect words: Papa, love, family. In that moment, the house itself seemed to exhale. Silence no longer ruled. Love did. Veronica saw it, and for the first time, she knew she had lost. Her influence shrank, her words no longer carrying power. She left the mansion soon after, her bitterness trailing behind her like smoke from a dying fire. The staff, once divided, began to follow Maya's example instead. They learned the rhythms, they clapped along, they let toys scatter across marble floors without fear. The house transformed not by decree, but by laughter. Weeks turned into months, and the mansion became unrecognizable. The sterile halls, once echoing with footsteps of servants, now pulsed with children's games. Socks became puppets. Kitchens became dance floors. Even the grand piano, long covered with dust, returned to life. Maya sat with the triplets, guiding their fingers across the keys, letting them bang out imperfect notes that still carried beauty. Damien joined sometimes, his deep voice humming melodies Evelyn once loved, his grief no longer silencing him but weaving itself into song. Maya remained steady. She never claimed triumph, never sought recognition. She only kept doing what Evelyn had asked, restoring joy. Yet her presence had become undeniable. She was no longer just the nanny. She was family. The children called for her in the night, reached for her hands in the day, leaned against her with trust deeper than blood. Damien, too, found himself turning to her, not with commands, but with questions, with gratitude he could not always voice. Between them, something unspoken grew: respect first, then warmth, then something like love. Not romance forced by circumstance, but love born from shared struggle, shared laughter, shared healing. The final proof came during a small gathering Damien decided to host in the garden. It was not a grand event, not the kind his wealth might demand, but an intimate circle of friends, neighbors, and doctors who had once doubted. The triplets darted across the grass, their small hands signing clumsy words, their voices breaking into imperfect syllables that drew gasps and tears from those watching. Muffins baked with their fingerprints lined the tables. Bubbles floated in the summer air. And for once, the Roth name was not spoken in whispers of tragedy, but in awe of transformation. Damien stood at the edge of a lawn, his chest swelling with pride he had not felt in years. He looked at Maya beneath a tree, her eyes shimmering with quiet joy as she watched the children. He walked to her, handed her a glass of lemonade, and said words he had carried in silence for too long. "You brought them back to me. You brought me back to them." His voice trembled, but his truth was steady. Maya did not reply with words. She only touched his arm, grounding him in the moment. As if on cue, the triplets barreled toward them, dirt on their knees, icing on their cheeks, arms wide with laughter. They tugged at their father's hands, at Maya's dress, pulling them into their circle beneath the fading light. There, the 5 of them sat on a blanket, sharing cookies, laughter, and something far more precious, presence. And so, the Roth mansion was reborn. Not in wealth, not in reputation, not in silence, but in love. The universal truth Evelyn had known from the beginning now pulsed through every corner of the house. Dignity is not granted by fortune, but by love. Respect is not earned through silence, but through presence. And sometimes the most invisible person in the room the nanny mocked, underestimated, humiliated is the one who holds the power to make a family whole again. Maya had not planned to open the box that night. She had only meant to trace the grooves on the wooden island again, to reassure herself that she hadn't imagined it. But curiosity is not always gentle. It pulls with the weight of destiny. When her trembling fingers lifted the lid and unfolded Evelyn Roth's letter, the air itself seemed to still. The words did not feel like ink. They felt like a voice whispering across time. If this house ever forgets to sing, remember, laughter is the key, and the one who restores it holds the future of this family. Maya's chest tightened. Each line revealed Evelyn's foresight. She had predicted Damien's silence, Veronica's hunger for control, the doctor's endless charts. And she had planted a safeguard, hidden not in contracts or business ledgers, but in joy. Evelyn had written of the one who would see the children as whole, a person not bound by title but by love. The letter spoke of an amendment, sealed and binding, that would shift guardianship if silence swallowed the children's lives. Maya's tears blurred the ink, but she read on. Evelyn had entrusted her children's future not to wealth, not to bloodline, but to the courage of someone who could awaken their laughter. Evelyn had not named Maya. Of course, how could she have foreseen her? Yet every word felt carved for her hands, her heart, her fight. Her mind raced. Should she tell Damien? Should she reveal the letter? Or would pride twist it into another weapon against her? She thought of Veronica, whose voice was sharp enough to shred paper and truth alike. If this letter reached her hands, she would dismiss it as sentimental madness, a delusion written in grief. But Maya could not unsee the truth. Evelyn's prophecy was real, and the triplets' joy had unlocked it. The very next morning, the mansion hummed with tension. Veronica had already heard whispers of Maya's late-night discovery. The housekeeper had seen her leaving the kitchen pale and trembling. Veronica cornered her in the marble hallway, emerald eyes glittering with suspicion. "What did you find?" she demanded, her lips curling as though tasting venom. Maya clutched the folded letter beneath her apron, her heart pounding. She did not answer. But silence in this house was never protection. That evening, Damien himself entered Maya's quarters. He had never stepped into a servant's room before, but his pride had cracked. In his hand was the wooden box, discovered half hidden under the island lip. His eyes burned with accusation. "What is this? What have you opened without permission?" Maya tried to explain, her voice steady despite fear. She told him of Evelyn's words, of the prophecy woven into rhythm, of the binding codicil hidden within the velvet pouch. But as she spoke, Damien's face hardened. His pride did not let him hear his wife's voice. It heard only betrayal. You dare twist her memory to steal my children from me?" His tone was sharp enough to wound. Maya's hands shook, but she refused to lower her gaze. "I have stolen nothing." Evelyn trusted joy more than silence. She trusted love more than wealth. And you, Damien, have buried her wishes with your grief. The word struck him, but pride is a stubborn ghost. He dismissed her, his voice cold as marble. Yet that night, alone in his study, Damien unfolded the letter. His hands trembled as he read Evelyn's handwriting. Tears filled his eyes, though he would not let them fall. His wife's voice, preserved on paper, pierced through every defense. She had known him better than he knew himself, and in her final words, she had judged him. The letter became a mirror Damien could not bear to face. Veronica moved swiftly once the existence of the letter became known. She whispered to the staff that Maya had forged it, that she had planned this from the beginning. She spread rumors to investors, suggesting the nanny had seduced Damien into weakness, using the children as pawns. Her venom seeped into every corner of the mansion, but the truth could not remain hidden. Dr. Calder, the family lawyer, demanded to examine the letter and the flash drive. His fingers traced Evelyn's signature, his eyes narrowing. At first he looked skeptical, but when he pressed the flash drive into his computer and the legal amendment appeared on screen, signed, witnessed, and sealed, his face changed. It was real. Evelyn's codicil had the weight of law. A tribunal was scheduled. The great hall of the Roth mansion transformed into a courtroom of sorts, with chandeliers gleaming above rows of chairs filled with lawyers, doctors, and family members. Veronica arrived in emerald silk, her presence radiating venomous authority. Damien stood like a statue at the center, his pride battling with the tremor in his chest. Maya was called forward last, her simple dress contrasting with the grandeur around her. Veronica struck first. Her words dripped with scorn as she painted Maya as an opportunist. This girl filled their heads with circus games and called it therapy. She made them dance on tables. She filled this house with chaos. And now she waves a letter conveniently discovered at the moment it benefits her most. Ask yourselves, is this Evelyn's wisdom or a servant's manipulation? Gasps rippled through the room. Maya stood still, her chin lifted. When it was her turn, her voice was calm, steady, almost fragile, but it carried more power than Veronica's venom. "I do not ask you to believe me," she began softly. "I ask you to look at the children. Look at their laughter, their voices, their lives." At her signal, the triplets stepped forward. Their small hands tapped the polished floor. 3, 5, 8. Mila clapped. Leo pressed his cheek to the wood. Bennie twirled with arms outstretched. And then, breaking the silence of centuries, Bennie spoke. His voice cracked, but the word was clear enough to echo in every heart. "Papa." The hall erupted in gasps. Even Dr. Stein, the neurologist who had once dismissed progress as fantasy, leaned forward in disbelief. Veronica paled, her arguments collapsing in the face of living proof. Damien's chest shook, his eyes brimming with tears he could not suppress. His son had spoken. His wife's prophecy had come alive. The tribunal did not end with Maya's dismissal, it ended with her vindication. Calder declared Evelyn's codicil binding. Maya, though not named explicitly, matched the description of the guardian Evelyn had foreseen. Veronica stormed from the hall, her power broken. Damien collapsed into a chair, his pride shattered, his grief laid bare. That night, the mansion was no longer silent. Laughter spilled from the children's rooms. Music hummed from the piano. And in the quiet of his study, Damien unfolded Evelyn's letter once more, not as an accusation, but as a lifeline. He whispered into the air, as though she could still hear him, "You were right." And for the first time, he believed it.